Welcome to Hope Possible Ministries. Shalom. Okay, so today we're going to cover Daniel chapter 8. Okay, and I have to warn you, today is a bit of a rabbit trail. And if you're not familiar with what a rabbit trail is, a lot of times you're discussing a topic, you have all these little side topics, and you'll go down this side topic, and sometimes those trails that you trail off to, sometimes they're meaningful and sometimes they're not. But it's always kind of like a diversion or a side trail. So they call that a rabbit trail. Okay. Uh, and some rabbit trails are actually worth exploring. We can actually get some benefit from it, which is why a lot of pastors actually do it anyway. They go off topic and talk about something, and then come back on topic again. So we're kind of going a little bit off topic, but in a way we're not. Okay, and like I said, I think this is worth exploring. So we have been covering eschatological time frames. That can be a mouthful. Okay, and we've covered some time frames such as the 42 months, the 1260 days, the 1290 days, and the 1335 days, and building the actual timeline and having that constructed. But in Daniel chapter 8, we see a 2300 time frame. 2300. Okay. Now, is that time frame already fulfilled, or is it still future and still to come from our standpoint in time? The short answer to that question is, that it is already fulfilled. It is not future from our standpoint of time. It is actually historical, and it is past tense. But let's find out why. Okay. So we're going to go to Daniel chapter 8. Okay, transition over here. I got to pull up. Oh, get back over to here. Yeah. Okay, Daniel 8. And you just saw a sneak preview of what's coming later. Me not having my screens ready. Okay, chapter 8, verses 2 through 14. And I saw in a vision, and it came to pass, when I saw, that I was at Shushan in the palace, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in a vision, and I was by the river of Ulai. Then I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram, which had 2 horns. And the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other. And the higher came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beasts might stand before him. Now, hold on for a second. The word beast means government or leaders of a government. We already covered that part, but that'll become obvious here later on. So that no beasts, no other governments or no other leaders could stand before him. Right? This goat with the 2 horns. And one came after the other. Right? Continuing verse 4. Neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. And as I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. And he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him in the fury of his power. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram, and brake his two horns. And there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground, and stamped upon him. And there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Waxed very great. And when he was strong, the great horn was broken. And for it came up four notable ones toward the four winds of heaven. And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great, toward the south, toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. And it waxed great, even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall be the desolation to give both the sanctuary under foot? And he said unto me, Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. 2,300. Okay. So that's what we got there. Now, we don't have to guess about the symbolic language in what we just read. You know, if we were to keep reading from Daniel 8, verses 15 through 25, we see that the angel Gabriel gives us the interpretation. The two-horned ram represents two kings, Media and Persia. The rough goat represents the king of Greece. That king is broken, and four others rise in his place, but not to his power and might. Now, this already took place. The king of Greece mentioned here is Alexander the Great. It is true that he was succeeded by four generals who had divided authority and altogether did not match the power of Alexander the Great. So all of that's past tense. Okay? And it says, out of one of them came forth a little horn. Who is this little horn? Okay, well, this is in reference to one of the generals. It says, out of one of them, out of one of the four. Right? Out of one of those four generals that became a king, out of one of them came forth a little horn. Right? And in history, we know that one of those generals' name was Seleucus the First Nicator. And he had a son named Antiochus the First Soter. Then his son was Antiochus the Second Theos. Then his son was Seleucus the Second Callinicus. Okay, and I'm probably butchering up these names, but I'm doing my best. Okay, and you can look up this history yourself. And then his son was Seleucus the Third Cyrenius. Then his son was Antiochus the Third the Great. Then his son was Seleucus the Fourth the Philopator. And then his son was Antiochus, son of Seleucus the Fourth. Then his son was Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanes. Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanes. Okay? I believe this is the little horn. Right? Let's look at a book called Maccabees, the book of First Maccabees. It's not a biblical book. And one thing that's really interesting about this e-sword is I can look at the apocryphal books by clicking on that little tab right there. They're actually, it's a downloadable, a free downloadable module that you can use, and that's what I've done. I've downloaded that module. So I can go to First Maccabees, chapter 1, and that would be in verse 10. 1 verse 10. And the chapter and verse doesn't make it, just so you know, just because someone says something like First Maccabees chapter 1 verse 10, that doesn't make it a Bible verse. This whole chapter 1 verse 10 or chapter 1 verse whatever, that's not what makes the Bible the Bible. That's just a way of organizing and keeping track of where this information can be located and found. It's just a way we look up data. Okay, that's all that is. So just because I say chapter 1 verse something, even though this is what you're accustomed to hearing when you hear people cite from the Bible, and every time someone cites from the Bible, they give you chapter and verse, chapter and verse, chapter and verse, and this is what we've been accustomed to. It doesn't mean that you can't give chapter and verse to another book that's not the Bible, okay? So that's what we're doing now. This is not the Bible, but it is still separated in chapter and verse so that we can look up this information, okay? I just wanted to take care of that real quick. And it says in this book, it says, "And there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes, son of Antiochus the king, who had been in hostage at Rome, and he reigned in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks." So here we see Antiochus Epiphanes, the fourth. And if you notice, every time this a name was used, whether it be Antiochus or the other name that I gave, each time they used the same name, they were called the second, the third, and this is the fourth one that was called Antiochus, right? And then his other name, his surname, was Epiphanes, right? So it's kind of almost opposite the way we do it nowadays. We actually do that by our surname, where it's like Tracy Bays the second or the third or the fourth. It's the first and last name together, right? But in Greece, it could be different surname from the first name and still be the second, third, or fourth based solely on the first name alone. Okay, that seems to be the case. So we see here in the First Maccabees that the person who ends up doing, if you read through this, you find out the history of what took place, of what this person did. It names this person as Antiochus Epiphanes, right? And this is one of the this is a descendant of one of the four generals that took the place of Alexander the Great. And actually, if you read the first 9 verses of First Maccabees, you'll find out more about Alexander the Great and things that took place during that time. Okay, so you find out more about that. But I just wanted to identify that here in First Maccabees, it talks about Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus the fourth Epiphanes. Okay, so here he is named right here as the person doing these things that follow. Okay, so just want to make sure I just point out for that purpose. So keep in mind, again, I say that the books of the Maccabees are not inspired scripture. But I believe that they can be classified as reliable ancient history books. I believe that they actually possess the accurate history of what actually took place. And today I'm going to show you exactly how accurate that it is. It's actually quite accurate. It's so accurate that the Bible verifies the accuracy of it. Okay? So that's what we're going to be looking at. And just so you know, all these events that take place, the defiling of the temple, then the rededication of the temple, and then everything that took place with the rededication of the temple is the reason why we have Hanukkah. It's a Jewish feast. It's referred to as the dedication feast, and it's called Hanukkah. That's where we get Hanukkah from, is from these historical accounts that took place in the books of Maccabees, 1st and 2nd Maccabees. So that's where Hanukkah comes from. And interesting enough, Jesus actually observed Hanukkah, and we have that in John chapter 10. So let's look at John 10. Verses 22 and 23. And it was at Jerusalem, the feast of the dedication, and it was winter. And Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. So we see that it's the feast of dedication, and it was in the winter. This is Hanukkah. Okay. So this is the feast of the dedication. And it was actually in winter around November. Okay, and we're going to see that shortly and find out why. Why can I say it was around November? A lot of people like to say Hanukkah. Well, isn't Hanukkah in December? Not really. Not if you're going to follow information that's in 1st and 2nd Maccabees, and you do the accurate correlation between the Hebrew calendar and the calendar that we currently have. If you want to hold accuracy to any of that, then you have to say that Hanukkah is supposed to take place in the month of November. So just want to put that there. I don't know why. I don't know why they've decided to do it in December. I don't know why they've decided to do that, but it's supposed to be in November. Okay. All right. Now, 1st Maccabees also echoes Daniel chapter 8. That's going to be the majority of what we talk about today. Now, I just want to point out, just before we move too much further, that even though there are a lot of generations between one of the four and Antiochus Epiphanes, right? That's just common in Jewish culture, that people can be represented as the son of somebody, even though there's a lot of generations in between. It seems like those generations kind of get skipped, and say this person's the son of that person, and say, well, that person's like his great 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 grandfather. How can you say that was his son? Well, it's because it doesn't matter how many generations there are. You go back to one of your ancient ancestors, and it can still be considered your father. You'd still be considered his son. And that's the way Jewish culture, it's the way biblically, the way it's portrayed. Like seeing about the prophet Ezekiel. Ezekiel was actually called in Scripture the Son of Man. And in Hebrew, the Son of Man means the son of Adam. The son of Adam. Really? Ezekiel, the prophet Ezekiel, was the son of Adam? Wasn't there a lot of generations between Ezekiel and Adam? Of course. There's a whole bunch of generations between Ezekiel and Adam. But still, he was called by God. When God was speaking to him, God called Ezekiel the son of Adam, son of man. Okay? And you can look that up. I'm not going to tell you where to find that. You got to do a little work. Just look it up. Okay, so Ezekiel's called the Son of Man. And, by the way, we know that Jesus was also called the Son of Man. Now, of course, that was in the Greek language. But if you take that phrase from the Greek, the Son of Man, and you were to transpose that in the Hebrew, the Son of Man, it would translate as the Son of Adam. So Jesus was the son of Adam. Okay? A lot of people miss that. That's That's what was said. But, there's a lot of generations. There's even more generations between Jesus and Adam as there was from Ezekiel to Adam. Okay? And all of us, if you're a male, you are the son of Adam. Because ultimately, we go back all the way to the beginning, and he was our first physical father. So I'm the son of Adam. Or I could be called the son of man. Right? And it just speaks to humanity. It speaks to us being human. So whenever Jesus is called the Son of Man, it speaks to his humanity. That Jesus was human. Right? It speaks to his humanity. The Son of Man. Right? So that's what that is. So I just wanted to point that out. So, it's kind of like, if you think about it, all these skipping of many generations is kind of like a Hebraic shorthand of genealogy. It's just like a shorthand, right? So when we talk about the generations between General Seleucus, however you want to say it, the first Nicator, and you want to say from that general who became one of the four kings, and all the generations between that and King Antiochus IV Epiphanes, it's not any type of problem. Right? It's not any type of problem at all. It's just that, eventually, this little horn would come from this general. In one of the eventual generations. Didn't have to be his immediate son. Whether or not it's his immediate son or his great-great-great-great-great-great-grandson, it doesn't matter. It's talking about this little horn coming from him. So that's not a problem. That's, it's just a way of looking at it. And it's kind of like a shorthand, right? Like I already discussed. So Antiochus IV Epiphanes was the little horn foretold in Daniel 8, verse 9. And that history was recorded in the books of Maccabees. Now, this little horn king set up an abomination in the temple. So we're going to go to 1 Maccabees, go back to that, and back to chapter 1. And we're going to go to what looks like 54. Okay, now the 15th day of the month in the 145th year, they set up the abomination of desolation upon the altar and builded idol altars throughout the cities of Judah on every side. Okay, so this is what was done under Antiochus Epiphanes. And it gives the actual date. And 15th day in the month Kislev, right? In the 145th year. 145th year, right? So that is important. Okay, and that's when this abomination was set up in the temple and also throughout all Judah, right? All these idols was set up. Now this month of Kislev, or Kislev, right, refers to the Babylonian pagan name for the 9th month of the Hebrew calendar. The 9th month. So this abomination mentioned in Daniel 8:13, and the transgression, it says, and the transgression of desolation. That's what we see in Daniel 8:13. And also in Daniel 8:25, it says, he shall be the prince of princes. Who's the prince of princes? Who's the king of kings? God. This is what took place and recorded in Maccabees 1, 1 Maccabees 1:54. Right, 1 verse 54. Antiochus Epiphanes set up worship to a false god in the temple, thereby doing the transgression of desolation and to stand against God, the Prince of Princes, or King of Kings. And this took place on the 15th of the 9th month, on the Hebrew calendar, right, of the 145th year. And this 145th year, that's just dating back to when Greece began. And Rome did the same thing. They dated their calendars from the time that the city of Rome was established. Okay, so that's what this 145th year stands for, right? But on the 145th year of the 15th of the 9th month, that's when the desolation took place, right? Now you have to remember the Hebrew calendar actually starts in the spring. So the first month is actually around March in the spring, around our third month. So when you consider that the first month is around the third month from our perspective, March, then you'll see that the 9th month falls around the 11th month from our perspective, which would be November, right? And then, what would come after that would be December and January, right? There would be 2 months after that come after that. So there's a 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 3 months. So it would be December, January, February. So that would be what follows Kislev. So what follows Kislev would be, 3 more months, 9, 10, 11, 12, right? So after November would be December, January, February, which means the first month would fall on March. So this 15th of Kislev would be somewhere around, the 15th of November or the 10th of November. It's going to fluctuate because the Hebrew calendar is not exactly like ours, and it shifts around a little bit, right? So it could be really early November, possibly the very end of October, maybe pushed to the middle of November, but I don't see how it could ever really be in December. Okay, so I don't know how they come up with that. But anyhow, by the time it gets to where it's in December, that's when they would add the extra month on to correct it. So if it happened, it only happened like 1 year. Most of the time it'd be in November. Okay, so that's just the thing to kind of look at for that. But that's when this this desolation took place. Okay, and November obviously is in the winter. Okay, so let's look at 1 Maccabees chapter 4. And we're going to look at verses 52 and 53. And this gives us the date of when the desolation was removed. It says, now on the 5 and 20th day, that's the 25th of the month, or of the 9th month, sorry, the 5 and 20th day of the 9th month, which is called the month Keslu, right? In the 148th year, they rose up betimes in the morning, sacrificed according to the law upon the new altar of burnt offerings which they had made. Okay, so now everything has been rededicated, everything has been cleansed, right? And then they built a new altar. Then they had a actual sacrifice in the morning. So that's the morning sacrifice. Okay, so that's pretty interesting there too. So now we have a time period from the time that the sacrifices stopped taking place to the time that they started up again. And we see 145th year, we see 148th year. Well, that's 3 years. It's a 3-year difference, plus the difference between the 15th of the 9th month and the 25th of the 9th month. Well, that's a difference of 10 days. So we got 3 years and 10 days is the time frame in between those 2 points. So let's do a little bit of math on that. Okay, so we know that the calendar is based on the lunar cycle of 29.5 days, which is rounded up because of the Jewish inclusive reckoning to give us 30 days, right? So if we take 30 days and we multiply that by 12, That's 360 days in a year. And we multiply that by 3 to get 3 years. That's 1,080 days. 1,080 days for 3 years, right? And then add the 10 days, which is the difference between the 15th and the 25th. So far we have 1,090 days. So the is the 3 years and 10 days, or 36 months and 10 days. So that seems to be the time frame. That seems to be the time frame that we're looking at in the book of Maccabees. Okay, now let's go back to this number 2,300. And it actually says 2,300 days in Daniel 8:14. Go back to Daniel chapter 8, verse 14. And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Well, let's take a look at this this word days here. 300 days. Oh, there's 2 key Hebrew words here, right? We see that there's Ereb, right, which means night or evening, right? And we see Boker. And Boker means morning or day, right? So we see evening, morning. So what's actually translated as days here is actually evening and morning, right? So the 2,300 is a reference to evening and morning. That it would be better to say 2,300 evening and mornings, right? And it's talking about sacrifice, right? Evening and morning sacrifice. That's what we see there. Well, let's look at Exodus 29. Exodus 29. And verses 38 and 39. Okay. Now this is that which thou shalt offer upon the altar, 2 lambs of the first year, day by day, continually. 1 lamb thou shalt offer in the morning, and the other thou shalt offer at even, or the evening. Okay, let's look at that. Okay, the Hebrew for that, for morning, is boker. Oh, we just saw that in Daniel 8, boker, morning. So there's a sacrifice in the morning, or the sacrifice at the boker, and then there's also a sacrifice at the even, which is, it's Ereb. The same word that we saw in Daniel 8, Ereb. So the Ereb boker sacrifices are these very same sacrifices we see in Exodus 29, 38 and 39, the morning and evening sacrifices. 2 sacrifices. So the 2,300 evening and mornings, or the 2,300 Ereb bokers, right? It's 2,300 sacrifices. And since there are 2 different sacrifices, and there's 2,300 of them total, right? Then we could take that 2,300 and we can divide it by 2 to figure out how many days took place. Because, you got 2,300 total of evening and mornings. So half of them would be evenings and half of them would be mornings. Right? So what we end up with is 1,150 days. So this 2,300 evening and mornings actually represents 1,150 days, because over the course of 1,150 days, there's going to be a morning, a boker sacrifice, and an evening an Ereb sacrifice. Or because of the way we know how the calendar actually works, it's actually evening then morning. So it'd be more like an Ereb boker. So it'd be an Ereb sacrifice and a boker sacrifice. The Ereb and boker represents 1 day. Altogether, 1,150 days. Are you following me? Okay. Whoa. 1,150 days? Isn't that more than the 1,090 days that we saw in the book of Maccabees? And when we did our math and we tried to add up the amount of days between the dates given in the book of First Maccabees, between First Maccabees chapter 1 and First Maccabees chapter 4, we saw that there is 3 years and 10 days difference. And whenever we did the math to figure out how many days would take place under the Hebrew reckoning for 3 years and 10 days, we come up with this number of 1,090 days, which is less than 1,150 days. Now, the 1,090 days, it breaks down to 36 months and 10 days. Well, this 1,150 days, it breaks down to 38 months and 10 days. 36 months and 10 days. 38 months and 10 days. The difference is exactly 2 months. And when you do the math and you subtract 1090 from 1150, you get 60. Exactly 2 30-day increments difference. Okay, I think we're onto something here. So when we did our calculation on the dates given from First Maccabees, we neglected to add in the needed 30-day months to correct the calendar so that the Passover would still take place in the spring, when the barley harvest was ripe, or when it was in Aviv, right? We didn't put that extra calculation in there, right? And because we can't just foresee, like, well, where exactly is this going to go? I mean, you almost have to time travel back in time to find out when these months had to be added in. But we do know that they are added in every 2 or 3 years. Every 2 or 3 years. So in this 3-year period, depending on how everything falls in, like there could be a 30-day period at the beginning of it, and then 2 years later, another one could be thrown in. So if there's one at the beginning and one 2 years later, then that would be 2 30-day periods of 60 days added in. And I submit to you that's exactly what did happen. Because the difference between 145 and 148 is 3. So it could be that when this took place in year 145, that year, the 30-day month was added, which when it's added to the end of the 12th month to be a second 12th month, or Adar 2. Is what's commonly called. And that could have happened in year 145. And then just 2 years later, it could have also happened, which would have been year 147, a second month of Adar 2 could have been added in, which would have been just before year 148. So you can see how these could have easily been added in. And, the way it would go is, if you add it in after 2 years, the following time you add it in won't be for another 3 years before the next 30-day period gets added in. So sometimes you got to do it one, and then 2 years later, another one, then 3 years later, another one, then maybe 2 years later, another one, then another 3 years later, another one. And it kind of works like that, depending on how everything falls in the spring. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so we have this difference of 60 days explained. So now what we thought was 1,090 days, now we can see, okay, when we balance it with Daniel chapter 8, we can easily see how it actually could have been 1,150 days when you account for the 2 months that were added in to adjust for the agricultural cycle so that Passover would be in the spring. Okay, so the 2300 evening and morning sacrifices that we see in Daniel 8:14 could have been the exact, and I believe it was the exact time frame that we see in the book of Maccabees, down to the very day. 3 years and 10 days. Right? Exactly the same. So can you see how knowing the way that Hebrew calendar reckoning really works can be useful in understanding things like this? If we had no idea how this stuff worked out, we might have taken that in our heads a little bit and say, I don't know where it goes, but I can make it fit somewhere. And now you find yourself trying to say, well, this little horn must be the Antichrist. Okay? And the little horn is Antichrist, which came from one of the four, which came from the one, which came from the battle between the two goats, and the goat with the single horn destroyed the goat with the two horns. And then later his horn was broken into four. And then one of the four had the offspring, which was the little horn, which is be the Antichrist. And you get this whole false narrative. It's a false narrative, right? Because we see that, oh, okay, well, all of these people are already named. I mean, you got the two-horned goat was the Medo-Persian Empire, which we know was succeeded by Greece. You know, Alexander the Great came in and took over those two empires and destroyed them and spread the Greek Empire, called the Hellenization of the world, right? And they call it Hellenization because in their Greek mythology, you got the Helen of Troy, right? And this Helen of Troy, this name Helen, was used to say that the Greek influence spread throughout the world, and they call it Hellenization. That's what they call it. So that's where all of that comes from. And we know that Alexander the Great, he was succeeded by his four generals. And we know that even all four of them together, they didn't have the same strength and might that Alexander had, even though Alexander the Great's reign was fairly short. Right? So all of this balances out with actual history. And we even have the name of the little horn, which was Antiochus Epiphanes. So everything in this, in Daniel 8, has been identified and is past tense. And, you know, another interesting thing is, along with Jesus observing Hanukkah in John 10, 22 and 23, we also have this in Daniel, right? That kind of also shows the accuracy of the books of Maccabees. But still, it doesn't mean that these book of Maccabees are actual scripture. It does not mean that. But what I believe it does mean, that these books are reliable, accurate, historical data. It's something we can look to, a historical document that is accurately portrayed what took place. And the dates of everything was accurate, which shows the fulfillment of the prophecy we see in Daniel 8. So we have the prophecy in Daniel 8 fulfilled in the book of Maccabees. Okay? So it does show that the book of Maccabees, the books of Maccabees, it's accurate recorded history. So the Bible can confirm that to be the case. Okay? So, you know, I know I've said in the past how the Jews have added their own feast and holy days, and they're not the feast and holy days that God established in the Bible. This Hanukkah might be a little bit of an exception because Jesus went there during the Hanukkah feast. Now, I can't say that absolutely means that God was putting a stamp of approval on it, but it's a lot closer than any of the other feasts or holy days that the Jews have come up with. So I would kind of lean to the side of Hanukkah. And if you think about the accuracy of the book of Maccabees, with how accurate they are with their dates, which fulfills actual prophecy, and you think about that, well, you have to think about the book of Maccabees as being accurate history. And if you take that as being accurate history, then what took place for Hanukkah, for that oil to be burning all 8 days, 1 day's worth of oil burning for 8 days, then you'd have to believe that really took place. And that is a historical document, documents a historical miracle that took place. That God actually did step in there and cause that fire to continue to burn for 8 days, even though there was only 1 day worth of oil in it. And God sustained that for 8 days, and that was a miracle that took place. I would say that Hanukkah could be considered a holy day, right? But it's just not one of the holy days or feast days instituted through Moses, right? And we'll get to that at a later teaching. So we need to, kind of recap what we found out, is that, with a Hebraic mindset, it's important to understand these time frame intervals and to go by the correct understanding. There is a set of rules that we have. A month is considered 30 days, biblically speaking, which is a lunar cycle, 28.5 days, rounded up to 30. We know that. We know that an additional month has to be added in every 2 or 3 years to keep the agricultural cycle in line, so that not only Passover takes place when it's supposed to, but every feast after that is timed from Passover. You don't know when, Pentecost is going to take place until you know when Passover is going to take place. You don't know when the Feast of Trumpets is going to take place until you know when Passover takes place. Everything is based off that first feast. Everything that comes after that is based off of it. You got the Passover and you got the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is basically the same thing, right? And I'll be, it's not the same thing. Well, the Bible lists both of them interchangeably in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. So in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread is considered to be the same. It's considered to be joint feasts that go together. Okay? But at any rate, everything is timed off of Passover happening at the right time. And that's how you know when everything else is going to take place. That sets everything in motion, right? And when you understand these things, then whenever you see these time frames in the Bible, you can actually have the correct understanding and understand, okay, that makes sense. That's why that number is the way it is. Okay, now that makes sense. That's why that number is the way it is. And before, I didn't know why it was that way. I didn't know why we had to have a 1260 day and a 1290 day and a 1335 day, right? And how is that all going to go together? Well, we explored that last time, and I believe that is sound according to Hebraic mindset and thinking, and without breaking any of the rules. You can't just take 45 and turn it into a 30. 45 is a 45. And there's nothing in the calendar reckoning that includes a 45-day anything, right? So whatever that 45-day window is has to be outside of the time frame, the 7-year time frame. Okay, we can't just sandwich it all together. We can sandwich together as far as it makes sense, right? And we can't just throw in this 2,300 and say, well, what about 2,300 days? Well, without the right mindset, you don't even realize that it's not 2,300 days, it's 1,150 days. And that's only 3 years, and that's 3 years and 10 days. That doesn't really go with any of the time frames in eschatology, which is 3.5. So it's not a 3.5. It's not 3 years and 6 months. It's only 3 years and 10 days. So it doesn't line up with anything in eschatology, first off. And all of these things in Daniel 8 are clearly understandable as being past tense from our present place in time. Now, from Daniel's place in time, it was future for Daniel. But then it took place. Now it's history. It's past tense. Okay, so that's basically what we found out today. And, of course, the little horn is King Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, can we say that Antiochus Epiphanes was a type of Antichrist? Of course we can. But we can't say that what's in Daniel 8 is really going to outline anything that's going to happen in our future. It's not really useful to do that because it's already been fulfilled. Okay? And, if the goat with the two horns is identified as Medo-Persia by the angel Gabriel in Daniel 8, who are we to go against the angel Gabriel to say, no, that was them, but now we're going to say that the two-horned goat was, I don't know, let's call it the United States, the Republican and Democratic Party. Okay? And then there's going to come along this goat with a single horn to destroy both the Republican Democratic Party. And then that person is going to be broken. And then we're going to have 4 leaders. Right? And then one of those 4 is going to come from the Antichrist. Well, the problem is that doesn't follow any of the prophecies dealing with the actual Antichrist. The Antichrist, according to the Bible, isn't shown as coming from 4. Right? Actually, in other scriptures, it says that he rises up after defeating 2. Not 4. Right? So it doesn't even follow the narrative of the actual rising of the Antichrist. So you can try to play that game if you like, but I don't believe you're going to get an accurate set of information for what's coming in the future. Right? So anyway, I digress on that. Now, you could try to say that there's some sort of a secondary or dual fulfillment of prophecy, but there is a problem with that, and let me explain what that means. Secondary or dual fulfillment means a prophecy that's already taken place in the past. It's been prophesied and fulfilled perfectly and took place. So the original prophecy was fulfilled, just like it said it was going to be. But then, later on in time, there could be a secondary or dual fulfillment later on, which oftentimes doesn't exactly line up with the original prophecy, but because it's close or similar, it's counted as a secondary fulfillment, right? Well, the problem with this should be obvious. You have no way of knowing ahead of time which prophecy is going to be dually fulfilled. Which prophecy is going to have a secondary fulfillment. You don't know. A secondary or dual prophecy is only established looking back and saying, well, this took place and this kind of lines up with this prophecy. And then you call it a dual fulfillment. That's done after the fact. So it doesn't do us any good beforehand. And one of the main purposes of prophecy in the first place is to give us information beforehand so that we can know before it happens, right? So secondary fulfillment does not help us in that case. And since it does not help us in that case, whenever we're trying to put all this together so that we can know what is coming in the last days, it doesn't help us there either. We can only know if it's a secondary fulfillment after the fact. And even then, it's like, okay, it lines up. That's good, but it was already fulfilled. It's fulfilled again. That's good, but it didn't help us to understand things ahead of time. So, and I'm not saying that secondary fulfillment isn't valid. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it just doesn't tell us anything in advance, right? It's something that's there, and we can look at it and say, oh, okay, this looked like it happened again. And I know I gave that scenario with the United States and Republican and Democratic Party, and don't go too crazy with that. So, oh, well, that's a secondary fulfillment. I wouldn't go too crazy with that if I were you. I don't know. Maybe it is. I don't know. I just said it. Okay. But what we're trying to do with this series is to line up what's going to happen in the future, right? And that's what we're actually looking at. All right. So that's my position at this point. Unless I see a future evidence of it, I'm going to hold to that position that Daniel 8 is past tense, already fulfilled, and secondary or dual prophecy fulfillment does not really help us at this point in time, even if it were to be true, which I'm really saying that it's not likely. It's really not likely. But what we've done here is we've gone down this rabbit trail. Okay, we found out that this 2300 does not really apply to the last days. Right? And if you think about it this way too, how are you going to take the 1150 and line it up with the 1260? Right? And the 1290 and the 1335. Because those all line up and there's only one 30-day month added in. And that's signified by the 1290. Right? Well, the 1150 within a 3-year time span has 2 months added in. So you can't have 3 months added in. You can't have 2 months added in with the 1150 and then one more added in with the 1290. And also, how are you going to establish the of the temple? That's where it starts, and then it's made holy again after it's over, right? Well, that would be the midpoint, but still you'd have 2 30-day periods in there instead of just the one. And the 1290 only leaves room for 1, not 2. Giving yourself a puzzle that's even more incredibly complex, and it just doesn't work. Okay, it doesn't work in my opinion. All right. But what we have learned from this rabbit trail is it's removed the confusion of this 2300. We now know what it is. We now know what all of this was portraying, what these things mean, and also we can see what the little horn means through the fulfillment that we see in the Maccabees has actually taken place in history. And if you look at it from the right mindset, so these are the things that we have learned. So I do think it's been a worthwhile rabbit trail. It's been worthwhile. And now we can cross that off our list and move on and not have to say, well, what about this? Well, we've now covered that. So, and I do think it's very helpful. So hopefully this helps. Hopefully this removes confusion, and then we can just move forward. Okay, and also we kind of learned today how the eSword can be a really good study tool with all these extra things. I mean, I even got things where I can compare the different ones. I can compare different things like that. I have this parallel thing where things are set up parallel. I can, like right here, I got the King James Bible. I could, pick another module. I can download a new King James Bible and put that in there if I want to compare verses between translations. I could even get like Greek or Hebrew down here, and I can even compare that if I download those modules. So anyway, there's different things that can be done. So it makes a very useful study tool. And of course, these apocryphal books, if you've ever been curious about them, even though they're not really books of Scripture, this at least gives you a chance to look at them and review them. Right? So gives that option. And I do like that they do it in different color so you wouldn't confuse it as a book of the Bible. All these apocryphal books are in blue, and then the regular ones are in black, and the words of God are in red. So I like that they did that little color coding so that you, at least in your mind, you don't get it confused with other books. The actual books of the Bible with books that are not books of the Bible. So I do appreciate this as a good study tool. All right, so that's all I have. That's all I have for today. And we're just going to keep pressing forward. And as we keep doing each step, we're going to learn something more and learn something more. And sometimes whenever I'm going over a topic, it might not seem all that relevant, but I'm not just doing it because I like saying words, right? Everything I'm doing is relevant in some way, and one thing builds upon another that allows us to, in the right fashion, go forward. Biblically speaking, that we allow the Bible to advance us forward instead of just trying to take pot shots at things and maybe I'll stick with this, and maybe I'll stick that with that, and I don't know, this seems to go here, and hey, that looks like an interesting picture. And I think that's where most people do that, and they get wrong ideas about the last days. So we don't want to do that. So let's progress in the right way. Let's do the work. Let's put in the time. Let's put in the effort. I again want to say, go ahead and look at this stuff yourself. Look at the lineage from the that general that became one of the kings in Greece, and it's all available on the internet. You can find out that it goes all the way down to Antiochus, the fourth Epiphanes, and then look into books of Maccabees and see what it says about what took place. And then when you read all that, then you'll understand, oh, okay, now, yeah, you're right. It does make sense. It does line up perfectly. Okay? And if you don't do that yourself, if you just take my word for it, it's likely not going to stick anyway. It's going to be in and out and gone. So put in some time, put in some work yourself, and you'll be glad that you did. All right, so that's all I have today. Thank you for joining us, and shalom.